So it has been odd, and you know, the young girls we started out with are now all grown women with children and divorces and all the rest of it. It has been rather extraordinary, and it's rather extraordinary to think of life without it now, because it's been a sort of backbone for all of us, hasn't it?
I absolutely feel that. I mean, in anyone's career within this industry, to have something that has been, I guarantee, and I put that in inverted commas, but a constant like this for 15 years is an incredible gift as an actor. And then to have it be so celebrated around the world is something that I think, and I don't want to talk for Julian, but I don't think anyone expected at the very start. And to be sitting here now with you and celebrating the very end, it's bittersweet, because as a cast, it's very rare to have an ensemble that gets on this well, but also this big. In a way, the success has been more enjoyable because we've celebrated it with so many other actors as well.
Thank you. Julian, one of the things that I love about the movies and the show is this continuous theme of changing times. You embrace the past so soberly, so delicately, and with a sense of humor, but there is always a gaze towards the future. So maybe tell us a little bit about navigating that in this final movie.
What's that?
Just
Sorry, I'm as deaf as a post these days, so we have to get used to that.
Just the fact that this show has always been about the characters embracing change.
But this show is about change, really, and it always has been. That here was a group of people who were basically running England and the Empire and all the rest of it. And as the First World War drew to an end, it was clear that that era was over, and that the people no longer wished to be governed exclusively by these people. And so gradually changes came, and then you could sort of say it took until the 60s and the Profumo scandal to finally finish it off. But during the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, there was a retreat of the upper classes, and the middle and working classes came forward. And of course, the first Labour government was in the 20s. You know, all of these, there's never a sort of overnight change, but the change had started by the end of the First World War. And that was the direction they were going in, and they had to really find if there was a place for them in the new world. And some families survived, you know, better than others, and a lot of estates were sold, and a lot of houses were demolished, and so on and so forth. But more than you think made it through, but they made it through on different terms. You know, they lived in their own kitchens. They had playthings there for their children. They had sofas there for themselves. The days when 20 or 30 people were looking after them were gone. Really, by the end of the Second World, we haven't got to that. We've sort of stepped out of the process just before that. But we've begun the 30s. And by the end of the 30s, the Second World War would be raging, and that would be, for many of these families, the coup de grace, really.
Thank you. And on that topic of change, Allen, your character, I mean, all the characters in Downton Abbey, they go through a big journey and full-fledged arc, but your arc is probably the most wide-ranging. You start as the family's driver and then end up marrying into the family. So tell me a little bit about embracing that journey as Tom Bronson and bringing it to a close in this movie.
It was a gift of a character arc to play, but also, like so many parts of our own lives, I was a victim of circumstance. Had Jessica Brown Findlay stayed, I wonder what Tom Branson's story would have been. Because ultimately, once you're happy in Downton, your story's kind of over in a way, isn't it? Once you've fully found happiness. So every time we got the new series, it was such a treat for me, and it was, I think, one of the reasons that Tom Branson resonates with the American audience as well is because he's an outsider, like a lot of the audience watching, and he's seen it for the first time, or he's sitting at that table awkwardly in white tie and tails, and I think the audience resonate with him because in a way they're the outsider at that dinner table as well, and it was always so enjoyable to play, and he was also a signifier of change. The fact that he could sit there and could be accepted, maybe with some people biting their lips, not really delighted he was there, but the idea that was a transition in itself. The idea that I believe, and I am quoting Julian, grubby Irish chauffeur could be sitting there and quaffing wine and having the soup and the entrees was something that was unheard of. But the fact is, within this house and with this family, they came to accept him.
I have to say, you brought up Jessica Brown Findlay, and I actually revisited that episode, I think season 3, episode 5, where Lady Sibyl departs the show. Can you take us back to filming that? And your performance is brilliant, the way you embrace Tom Branson's grief.
Well, thank you very much. I will never forget those days filming Sibyl's death, because it was the first time that one of the upstairs family was going to leave the show, and we really felt that as a cast. We knew that this was a big change. What we knew as the ensemble was going to change, and change significantly, because as Julian has said before, if a servant leaves, that's fine, they can go. But if a family member leaves, I'm afraid you have to die. So it was over 3 days, and it was exhausting, and especially it was exhausting for Jessica, because she had to play that. But yeah, and I remember I took some liberty in that scene, because I started to do some ad-lib of what I felt that Tom would say. And all of those moments of saying, please, darling, don't leave me, were just stuff that I came up with, that I think that Tom, rather than be very British and stoic, was going to be much more, I suppose, raw in that moment.
Well, we were all very emotional about the scene when Sybil died. I mean, I remember crying my eyes out when I was watching it. Emma said to me, "You wrote it, what did you think was going to happen?" But also with Branson, I had been thinking, we needed a storyline that crossed the divide. And I was at a dinner party, and I was talking to the woman sitting next to me, and she was telling me how her great aunt had run off with the groom, in fact, and married him, and the great aunt had been Lady Mary something or other. And she'd gone off with the groom, and I thought, oh yes, we'll do that, but not with the groom, because we decided we were in the car era, and so horses never played a major part in the series, and so we do it with the chauffeur. But then I just worked with Allen, actually. We'd made a children's film together called From Time to Time, and he was coming up for the chauffeur, and I remember he was originally written as Scottish, and I got this message from his agent saying, oh, he can do a Scottish accent. And of course, as they said it, I thought, no, I don't want a Scottish accent, because one of the great issues at the time was Irish independence and the Troubles and so on and so forth, which was all happening at that particular time. And I thought, no, if we have an Irish chauffeur, then we can get all the Troubles in and his loyalties to the Irish and so on, without, any jiggery pokery. We've got the character right there. So, in a way, Allen sort of made his own character by arriving as an Irishman, and we gave into that. And that was that. But then you had a whole plot, didn't you, of being a sympathizer of the Troubles,
yes,
and all the rest of it. And if you look, it's interesting, if you look at the papers now for, 1919 and whatever, there's no mention of Russia or China or all the other revolutions going on. It's all full of Ireland. And now, because of Tom Branson, we were able to involve that in the show.
Of course, I didn't know that. So all I got was Scottish chauffeur and thought, right, well now I'm going to just stretch my acting chops. I'm going to get a Scottish accent down. And then I also, in the back pocket, had the Yorkshire accent prepared. And when I walked in, they went, just your own accent, thank you. And I was horrified. I thought, there's no way I'm going to get this job.
I want to also bring up the Noel Coward storyline in this final movie, so delightfully played by R.T. Froschen. So tell us a little bit about how you arrived at that idea. Why was involving Noel Coward important?
Well, we started with the idea of opening on the opening night of Bittersweet in 1930, because it seemed very sort of iconic and emblematic of that particular period and so on. And then my son, Peregrine, said, well, I don't understand, why don't you just have Noel Coward in it? Because he'd obviously be in the theatre for the opening of Bittersweet. And then he was a really apposite for us anyway, commentator on the changes that were happening in society. What I liked about it was that Coward was aware of the changes that were happening and indeed made his living playing these characters and made, the changes that were happening at the center of several of his shows and plays. But he's not angry. It's not an angry, violent, full of hatred thing. It's simply marking the fact that English society was evolving and Western society was evolving. And that seemed much more appropriate to us than someone raging and spitting. And so then he became a character. And I think it worked really. I mean, later, of course, Coward, he went on through the 40s and 50s and eventually became a very successful cabaret star, which I think was probably the best career for him. He wasn't, I know I'll be shot down now, but he wasn't really an actor. That wasn't really what he did. What he was a commentator. And in his plays, in his songs, in the things he wrote, and in the things he performed in cabaret, you can see that, and you can tell it. I mean, when you now look at them in Which We Serve or something, with this sort of tilted hat and all the rest of it, it all seems camp and rather nonsensical. But that's not true of his songs and shows, where if you look at them carefully, you can see what he's saying about the society he's living in. I think it was a good idea, and I'm really glad we took it up. Artie, I think it's marvellous.
He really is.
Oh, yes, please.
On that note, R.T. Froschen is a new member of the cast.
Yeah.
Alessandro Nivola is a new member of the cast. Not technically Paul Giamatti, we've seen him before, but he returns. What is it like for you, since you are such a, I'm assuming, tight-knit family as the Downton Abbey family, to welcome new members of the cast to include them in the process?
I've never experienced a cast where there's less of an ego anywhere in it. And I think that actually came from the late Dame Maggie, because the ego would have had to start there, and it never existed. Amongst the cast, she was very much part of the ensemble. So anytime anyone came in, and I was one of those people, I only came in episode 4 of the first season, and I immediately was terrified. And I remember Michelle Dockery knocking on my door, and I was sitting in my tiny trailer thinking, no one wants to speak to me. And she said, come on, we're all having lunch on the grass. And suddenly she welcomed me in. And that sense of anyone joining us, you bring in a new energy to a show, and it's always welcomed with open arms. And Archie has said that as well. He was so terrified, and then the second day, he just felt like he was already part of it. So it was something that we always made sure that anyone coming in felt as welcome as possible, and you're just part of the team.
Thank you. Of course, the experience of the movies, the 3 movies, is a lot more richer for people who have seen the show. But I love that if you haven't seen the show, you can still understand these movies, you can still get the essence of the movies. Are you thinking about this when you're writing them to make sure that they work on their own for people who might not have seen the TV show?
Well, I think to a certain extent you always want things to work on their own. And obviously you hope that if people watch this movie and they really enjoy it, they'll think, oh, maybe my friends were wrong and the show wasn't terrible, you know, and they'll go back and look at it. But I think...
Or get better friends.
But I think I was conscious that at the end I wanted to write mainly for the loyal following, you know, because we'd been going for years and years by now, and I wanted the people who'd been loyal to the show and who'd enjoyed it to have a sort of good goodbye. You know, of course, in a way, Maggie had already gone, and Maggie was very much the spirit of the show, but we tried to get Maggie to sort of haunt this last film. And so she is present throughout it. And she was a very great personality. She was a very strong influence on the show and a very strong influence on all of us, really.
I actually really wanted to end on that note talking about Dame Maggie Smith. And first of all, thank you for writing that weekend line in the movie.
Yes.
Iconic Maggie Smith lines that we love. I'm wondering if you could maybe share some reflections or your favorite memories working with her. I mean, I know this is an unfair question. You probably have endless memories, but if you could reflect on that, I would really appreciate it.
We put in the weekend line. Also, I hope you noticed when Edith said to Mary, he wasn't Turkish, was he? But there we are. We have a history of these people. I mean, I enjoyed all of it, really. I mean, for me, Sybil's death, I suppose, was one of the most meaningful moments of the whole thing. I mean, I don't quite know why, because people die, you know, we all die. And that's the end of it. And it wasn't, you know, unkind to, of course, all the fans wrote terrible letters to me and all the rest of it. But actually, it was that Jessica wanted to leave. She wanted to do 3 years and then leave and keep it sort of contained in that way. And so we were able to look up and get whatever the thing was that she had and died of. What was it? Preeclampsia and an idea, eclampsia society and all of that stuff. The shock actually was Dan, because I thought he'd stay, and I thought we'd all do years of boo-hoo, and he and Mary couldn't have a baby, and then, oh, they could, you know, and all the rest of it. And all of that was taken, because we went to the read-through, and Dan said, look, I've been thinking about this, and they, for 3 years, they were under contract, but at the end of 3 years, they had to decide if they wanted to stay or to go. And suddenly Dan said, oh, I think I'm going. And that was a rather bleak moment, actually. But in fact, in a way, by killing it, and because then I said, oh, well, will you come back next year so we can finish happy, and then come back, and next year we'll kill you in episode 1. And he said, no, I don't want to do that, because he'd been offered a play on Broadway and a movie and this and this and this. And the thing about actors, there's no rule. There's no rule book. You have to go with your gut all the time. Is this a good idea? And your agent, you know, gives you advice and all the rest of it. And sometimes the advice turns out to be good advice, and sometimes it turns out to be baloney. And that's just the way of earning a living. That's what we all have to go through. So I'm not in the least critical of Dan for making the decision to go. I think you make these decisions and you act on them, and either they turn out to be right or not for you. But what it did give us was, if we killed him at the end of the episode, although that was pretty bad, because unfortunately in England that episode ran on Christmas night. So you can imagine the letters that came out of that.
I sent him a message on that and said,
Oh.
well done, Dan, you just ruined Christmas Day for 12 million people.
I had people saying, I will never watch anything with your name on it again. And all of this.
That
And
was
anyway, we got through it, and there it was then. And it allowed us to have a period of Mary rebuilding herself. And of course, that gave us several plot developments, and the wrong men and the right men, and the blah, 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 blah. And in fact, as it turned out in the end, our viewership went on up, and Dan came to America largely and made various series here and all the rest of it. So I don't think anyone suffered. What are you doing?
What I'm doing is saying, could you say your best moment with Maggie, which I suggest is the marmalade moment?
Oh, well, I don't know if it was the best moment in that way, but when I first met Maggie, I didn't, I knew who she was, of course, but I didn't know her. And we were making a film called Gosford Park, and which is, anyway, it so happened that we were making this film, as always, with too little money. And that's part of our business, so it didn't particularly alarm me, but what it meant was that for the first week, we had to be in Maggie's bedroom because they could get that room ready quite quickly. And while we were spending the first week filming, then they could get the rest of the house ready to make the rest of the film. So I was introduced to Maggie, and then immediately I had to spend a week in her bedroom. And that was, again, rather alarming. But anyway, she came up. There was a moment in it, I don't know if any of you saw this film, but there was a moment when she had her breakfast in bed, and she had to take the lid off the marmalade pot and say, "Oh, bought marmalade, I call that very feeble." And the only time Maggie came up to me, I didn't really understand the marmalade line. I said, "Oh, well, that was because a great aunt of mine used to say, with this sort of house, that if any of the jams or jellies were not made in the house and were bought, then it meant that either the cook or the still-room maid didn't know what they were doing." And said, "I've got it." And she never asked me another question, really, for the following 20 years or whatever it was. And of course, it was in all the trailers. And from that moment, I mean, you know, we never became close friends or took a house by the sea together, but I knew how to write for her, and she knew how to play the lines. And it was a very rewarding partnership. And I knew I was safe. I mean, as a writer, you always want to feel, so as in anything, you want to feel safe. But as a writer, you want to feel you're working with actors who understand what you're doing. And Maggie was a very useful leader for me in that, because she never changed anything. And, you know, we had a very successful 20 years together, really. And that was that. But why were you...
No, that was the question. You didn't get a question, but it's fine. You've done it.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So, I mean, I have so many stories from Maggie. I think the thing that really sticks with me is her level of preparedness every day. She was not only just word perfect for her lines, she knew exactly the beats, the tone, the pacing. It was a school day every day sitting with Maggie, and I know I've said that before, but if you just watched her and watched, now I wish I could have been in her head, but as she was preparing and watching a scene take shape, watching how she was already interpreting how her character, the Dowager Countess, would react to this now that she was watching it live. And I think that comes from such a vast and incredible theatrical past as well, working in the theatre. On this show, it was very much a collaboration, each scene, and we would work it out, and it felt always with her that she had already almost preempted everyone else's decision and was ready to give a performance in relation to that performance that was coming back at her. So it was just incredible, her level of work and precision.
And when we were making Gosford Park, in those days, this was the first feature script that I'd written that had got made. So I had no clout at all. I had no power beyond, the power of your own personality. And there was a moment in it when they were talking about a film that this American producer is going to make, and a whodunit. And she says, and who turns out to have done it? And he says, oh, well, I couldn't tell you that, it would spoil it for you. And she says, but none of us will see it. And unfortunately, Robert Altman couldn't see why this was funny. Because as far as he was concerned, it was very hard work to make a film. It was very difficult. Why was it funny? And he said, I don't get it. Why is this funny? And of course, all the actors said, no, Bob, of course it's not funny at all. No. And I could see one of my best lines going up in smoke. But I didn't have the power to say, come off it, Bob. So mercifully, just as it's about to be cut, Maggie said, I think I can make it work, Bob. And of course, then I was saved, and the line was shot and was used in all the trailers. And it was a very, very funny line. But it was really, that was an early example of when I realized that I was safe where Maggie was concerned. That in fact, I didn't have to explain why it was funny or why it was this or why it was that. We were in sync on that. I mean, of course, Maggie had a very distinguished career before she ever heard the word Downton Abbey. And, she'd won Oscars and all sorts of awards, and she'd had this tremendous career. But what she hadn't had was that level of popularity. And I'm a bit ambivalent about that. I mean, I think that until Downton Abbey, she could win Oscars and all the rest of it, and be damed and this, and still go into Waitrose and buy supper. I think we took that away from her. But nevertheless, what it did mean is normally, when they're showing the death of some film star of the 40s, and they have to show clips and black and white clips of some film from 1953. We didn't have to do any of that with Maggie, because she was as famous on her last day of life as she'd ever been. And I was glad of that.
We will